Now, we've heard a lot about unemployment, more specifically about the magnitude and about the implications of youth unemployment in Greece, in Europe, in the UK this morning, in the US, and in the world. And we have already started discussions within this more solutions-based approach that is the second day, that marks the second day of the conference. So we can move on to discussing proposed specific foundation initiatives that aim to address this very difficult issue of youth unemployment in Greece. The foundation has engaged in extensive research in collaboration with esteemed partners from both public and the private sector in its exploration of three key areas. And these will be the topics of this and the next two sessions. We will start with the interesting and important topic of entrepreneurship and the work under development by the Foundation and MIT for the establishment of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Entrepreneurship Institute. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Professor Dimitris Bertsimas of MIT, who will share with us the vision, the characteristics, and the proposed actions of the initiative. Thank you.
Good morning. What I would like to, in the next hopefully 25 minutes, I'd like to tell you are some thoughts that some of us, and I would like to name my colleagues, Professor Odoni, Professor George Stephanopoulos, Gregory Stephanopoulos, Professor Michalis Triantafylou, and Professor John Tzitziklis. All of us are Greeks, and all of us are at MIT, and we're all friends as well. These are some of the unifying themes. So what's the plan? I would like to tell you the motivation of these ideas that we are going to put forward, the aspiration of what we are trying to achieve, and the concrete proposal, the vision and the mission of the proposed institute, our envisioned structure, and some thoughts on next steps. So regarding motivation, and this has something that has occupied my mind for quite a bit of time. So what are countries that have made a significant difference in their economic development in the last 50 years that Greece can learn from? There are two that I have found to be particularly relevant. One is Singapore, and it has been mentioned by the previous panel, and the other is Israel. And if you look at the GDP per capita, I'm using data from the World Bank, 50 years ago, these three countries have relatively similar levels. But in the last 20 years or so, that has not been the case. So Singapore has over 50,000 GDP per capita, and Israel has about maybe higher than 30. Greece was doing reasonably okay for some time, but then in the last 15, 20 years, as we all know, things have not been working very well. So this is some motivation that I would like to immediately use. And I think both countries are relevant for this discussion, but for different purposes. As far as entrepreneurship is concerned, I have three motivations. One is understanding the case of Israel, and a close neighbor of Greece. So Israel is a country of about 7 million people, only 60 years old, surrounded by enemies, in a constant state of war since its founding, with no natural resources. Yet it produces more startup companies than Japan, China, India, Korea, Canada, and the UK. And here's another startling statistic, at least to me, that Israel has attracted per person over twice as much venture capital investment as the United States, and 30 times more than Europe. So there was a book that I recommend if you haven't read it. It's called Startup Nation, The Miracle of Israel's Economic Development, or Perturbation of that identifies cultural and educational aspects of the Israeli development in that respect. One member of our panel is actually an old friend of mine, who is a professor at the Technion. So that's my first motivation, looking at Israel. The second motivation is the case of MIT. It might sound boastful. We started by Mr. Lazaridis talking about Mr. Bush, not the presidents, the Vannegar Bush from the 1940s, who was a distinguished member of the MIT faculty. And if you look historically, there was over 25,000 companies created by MIT alumni. And these companies collectively, they employ 3.3 million people. This is right now. They generate annual world sales of about $2 trillion, which is roughly the equivalent of the 11th largest economy in the world. So clearly, this business of science and engineering, developing companies that make a difference in the world, there are examples of that, more than Israel, of course. And finally, my own personal experience. I'm primarily an academic. On the other hand, influenced by the entrepreneurship that exists at my home institution, MIT, where I've spent roughly 30 years of my life. I have been involved in founding companies, and again, this is not trying to be boastful, just to illustrate that an academic, and I'm not the only, there are many, been involved in starting companies, some of them successful, some of them active already. And what I have learned is that, first of all, it is feasible, that it makes a difference, and there is the key to success is, at least in my experience, is passion, good chemistry with the team, good ideas, understanding the markets, strong system of support, particularly relevant, and also strong leadership, and of course, luck. So these are the three motivations: the story of Israel, MIT more generally, and my personal experience. So what is the aspiration? The aspiration is to help Greece develop a path towards wealth generation and also job creation, which is a natural consequence of this via entrepreneurship. That's the aspiration. In terms of what is the proposal, we are proposing to develop a new entrepreneurship institute. We have a proposed name, as you know from the title, to facilitate these objectives. So I'd like now to go into a bit more detail about what the vision is, what the mission is, and what is the structure. So we would like for the Institute to become the premier institution in Greece that supports the formation and expansion of an entrepreneurial landscape that enables young Greek entrepreneurs to start up successful companies and create wealth for the Greek society at large. A natural objective, a natural vision given the aspiration I mentioned. In terms of mission, we would like to inspire a new generation of young entrepreneurs at universities, research institutes, and the economy more generally, to educate, train them, and also connect these entrepreneurs by providing support for educational, research, and training programs, and also facilitate and accelerate the successful development and transition to market of these promising entrepreneurial initiatives in select areas in the Greek economy. So that's broadly the mission we envision. And I would like now to mention some specific actions in these three broad areas. Actions to inspire. And this, of course, is not an exclusive list. These are thoughts that we have from some of our experiences. For instance, and I should also mention that I can speak about myself, but I think it's also true for my colleagues, that we don't claim that these are unique or unusual ideas, and I'm certain, and I've increasingly in recent weeks have been informed about activities like this in Greece. In fact, the idea is to work collaboratively and help leverage what already exists. Some of these ideas that we think are interesting to explore is, for example, a Greek Entrepreneurship Week, in which we bring together people either starting or more seasoned for introductions, discussions, and so forth. Another example that is quite common, at least in our experience at MIT, is entrepreneurship competition. One of the quite successful ones that we have at MIT is called the 100K competition, in which students, together with teams, but at least a member of the team should be a student, participate in a competition that is being judged by seasoned venture capitalists and investors. And many of very successful companies, for example, a company called Akamai, in fact, I know the founders, was actually runner-up in one of these competitions about 10 years ago, and is currently maybe a $12, $13 billion company, about 100 meters from MIT campus. But it started in the 100K competition. Another aspect for inspiration is to incorporation with Greek and world-class universities to support a program of educational offerings that inject an innovative and enterprising dimension to the Greek universities' research and educational activities. In the last year, I have been personally involved in the council in the University of Athens, in the hopes, and many of my colleagues have as well in other universities, in the hopes to help the environment and help and I have my own personal experience from the University of Athens is that entrepreneurship is not a core, and I'm understating, is not a core value in the environment. Yeah. So there's lots to do there. Even though it is my observation that the talent of the young people that are students in the university, and I'm not saying it to be nice, that's just my honest observation, is very high. So these are some of the, and I have graduated from the technical university, which is also equally high. So, so the basis, I think, from an educational perspective exists. So actions for educational research and training programs. And again, these are natural, in our opinion, natural ideas to support, for example, together with other institutions in Greece that have similar activities, to support in a collaborative way incubators and accelerators, training workshops, for example, to introduce venture capitalists and angels investors, and also to link with business networking contracts. Active mentoring, to expose young Greek entrepreneurs to global marketing, fundraising, business advice, and also international expansion. So, so these are on the educational and the inspiration side. So would like also discuss some ideas for providing leveraged financial and advisory support. So part of our Envision Institute is to provide venture capital equity to promising entrepreneurial initiatives consistent with the mission of the Institute. Examples of these conditions is that the ventures are in the areas of the economy that have been selected by the Institute as areas of focus, and I'll tell you more about that. That the ventures are initiated by young Greeks from universities, research institutes, or the economy. We don't envision that the Institute is seen, in fact, it should be seen, the primary focus should not be as providing seed money. We envision that the Institute's investment is heavily leveraged by private investors, not to exceed, let's say, a relatively low capital contribution in the range of 10 to 30%, so the remaining to be provided by private investors, venture capitals, angels, and so forth. That in addition to providing some funding, mentoring, education, and so forth, but we would like to, we envision that the Institute provides the rest of activities in education, training, mentoring, networking, and so forth, that often make a critical success, a critical point in making the company successful, for the Institute to do that. So what we see as the essential characteristics of the Institute. First, that this is a non-profit organization. quite key. Second is that so we would like this to be a sustained activity. So not only that, in other words, that we start with an endowment that we decrease to zero, but rather that the success of some of these companies that were generated with seed funding from the organization, as well as the other aspects of advice, education, networking, and so forth, some of this is reinvested back to the institute activities in a way that maintains the non-for-profit aspect, so that it is a perpetual institute for the future for the country. Another aspect that we think is important is that this is a lean organization. Rather, in other words, the percentage of the expenses that are devoted to administration and management is in the order of 8 to 10%. So the majority of the resources allocated per year are really allocated to activities that can produce growth, that can produce future success, and eventually reinvested. Finally, that the Institute operates primarily through partnerships with a wide variety of organizations and institutions already existing in Greece. And to be honest, I have been educating myself in recent months about, and I have seen quite a few that are very exciting. So the envisioned structure, this was missing, unfortunately, in the documents that you have in front of you, but I would like to go together with you. So we expect that there will be a board of directors. I will tell you a bit more about that. A CEO. Then different functions that are supported. Education and training, incubators, accelerators, and then venture capital funding. And all of the three are important. And then there are specific projects that the Institute is focusing on. This is consistent from our earlier interactions with this foundation. We have been talking, I understand, yesterday about cultural tourism. That's a focus area 1. Focus area 2 is agriculture and food. I'll tell you a bit more, and I know that we have discussions afterwards. Product-oriented new businesses, area 3, and area 4 is information and service systems, and I'll give you a bit more detail of what we have in mind. Again, this is not an exclusive list, but these are lists that in our discussions among ourselves, as well as with the foundation, have found that it's quite promising for the Greek environment. So more specifically, under cultural tourism, an example might be hospitality management, agriculture and food. There's more discussion coming in the next panel, if I'm not mistaken. In the area of product-oriented new businesses, these are some examples from our experience: medical devices, electronics and communications, specialty chemicals and materials for energy systems, safety and security systems, potentially other areas, generic pharmaceuticals and biosimilars, green technology products. Again, this is not an exclusive list, but this is at least to give you an idea of what we are thinking about. In the area of information systems and business services, we are thinking about big data and associated services, digital media products, for example, games, electronic travel and booking systems for cultural tourism, connecting with area 1, mobile services and marketing, business-to-business marketing, electronic marketplace forum for shipping companies, given the strength in this area of Greece, and others. So again, a selective, smaller collection. Not everything goes. I talk about the board. Again, these are our initial thoughts. We're thinking to have a broad participation of various key players. So we're thinking to have, again, the numbers are not give you an approximation of what we're thinking, that some people that are either rectors or chairmen of councils from 2 Greek universities to represent the Greek universities in the process. then also directors of principal research institutions like Forth, Democritus, Eketa, Fleming, and so forth. Then people from major entrepreneurship institutions in Greece, people from, quite more people actually, from major venture capital funds and groups of angels investors, and then from business and professional associations. And so again, I hope I'm sending you the message that this is trying to be an inclusive effort, not an exclusive one, with the ultimate objective, of course, of helping the country. So next steps. So we have been trying to understand the current landscape as much as we can. At least all of us that are participating in this discussion have spent most of our lives in the United States. It's not that we have a lot of contacts with Greece, but it's not that we know extreme details of the green landscape of entrepreneurship. Build a business plan, hopefully with the help of the foundation, form the institute, and then off to the races. And hopefully in 10, 15 years, we can compete with the Israels of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bertsimas. Now I'm lucky enough to have with me in this panel representatives from prestigious academic institutions and research institutions, Cornell, Johns Hopkins, Brookings, as well as a representative of the market, of the VC market, more specifically. We can start with Professor Shwartz's remarks and insights.
Thank you. So my friend Dimitris saved me about half the lecture, which is very good, by describing Israel, but I would like to add some comments about that. So I come from a Technion in Israel, and in the previous session somebody mentioned the fact that about 100,000 Greeks left Greece in the last year or so to look for jobs outside the country. So let me give you the analog of that in Israel. In the 1990s, there was a huge wave of immigration to Israel out of the former Soviet Union. Israel absorbed roughly 12% of its population in new immigrants over 1 year. And all the economists claim that it's going to be a huge disaster, as a result of which the economy will go down. But you saw what the graph says. That was not the case. What happened was actually exactly the opposite. It was the beginning of a new wave of expansion for the economy, and that was basically for the reasons which center around the proposal that Dimitris has brought to you earlier, which is innovation and mostly in the area of high technology. So that had to do with three components. The first component is technical education, which was very strong in Israel. It was also strong among the people that came to us from the former Soviet Union. The second one was the entrepreneurial spirit, which is less tangible thing. It's something which is much more difficult to figure out how to promote. And the third one was a structure of venture capitalists and government together that worked on providing the funding, where most of funding and the infrastructure and the regulations, so the private sector could pour enough support to support, especially at the early stage before companies are formed. And this created a very large wave of small and mid-sized companies that became very successful. I'll just give a few numbers, a few examples. So for example, if you look at areas like computer vision, I think the most prominent system in the world you all know about is the Kinect. But what you don't know is that the Kinect was invented and developed in Israel, and there was very serious competition from another company called 3DV, which was like the runner-up. 3DV was developed in Israel. And so the two leading systems in the world were developed in the same country due to the combination of technical education and entrepreneurship spirit. Now, entrepreneurship spirit is something that is part of education, but not of the kind that you give at universities. You start at kindergarten. You do this by creating role models and promoting them in the country. And it's a much wider effort, but it's a critical effort if you want to have the critical mass to transform an economy. And what happened in Israel is exactly that. The high-tech sector transformed the economy by creating a second circle of services to the high-tech and a third circle, and everybody is much better off because of this engine that is driving forward the economy. As part of the entrepreneurial spirit, I would mention the existing networks. So the world of entrepreneurship is built around networks of people that know personally a lot of other people and open doors for you. It's not just the technique of how you present yourself to this and that person, but it's really personal knowledge among the people that direct a very large group and create personal connections. These networks are huge. There are thousands of people, but they're really based on personal relations, like in the old days. And I think we have one representative of this sector that can tell you more about that, so I'll skip that point. But this is an essential part of the structure that will make it possible to actually move things forward. Otherwise, the ideas will remain just that, nice ideas. And this brings me to the issue of support of early stage and the issue of scaling. It's very easy to imagine an institute that will talk to people and mentor people and help them move forward. But let me give you an example from a place for which I have a second hat on my head, and this is the Technion-Cornell Innovation Institute here in Manhattan. This institute was created in order to create a synergy between the two universities and to help us develop people who will be leaders in the domain of the digital world, which is a large part of a modern technology. And what we find in there is that mentoring and educating people to become entrepreneurs is a very long process, it's very labor intensive, and it requires people who really know the area and know the landscape and the ecosystem. And it's very difficult to scale this up to something very large if you want to go into something that involves deep technology. This combination is something which will have to rely on universities on the one hand, but also on experts from the business world and from the entrepreneurial world. And we have a huge shortage in that direction. I would tell you a little secret. A lot of people that write books about entrepreneurships, most of them come from business school. Most of them write about models that were true 10 years ago. And I'll get to this point at the end of my presentation. So a few more, one more point about this. I really salute Dimitris for learning from past experience of other people. I think it shows very good examples. But the word of warning. The world is changing very fast. When you get numbers about countries, if you're really lucky, they're 2 years old. Usually they're older. But just to put you in perspective, I look at this audience, I consider myself to be a young person. This is about youth unemployment. There are no young people here. The world that the young people know is not the world that we grew in. It's completely different. I gave a lecture to young people 2 days ago, and I asked them if they can imagine a world in which Google doesn't exist and a smartphone doesn't exist. Now we're talking about 5 to 7 years. They cannot imagine this world. It doesn't exist in their mind. And so the place you have to pull these people, if you want to build the entrepreneurial spirit, is according to the world they live in and according to their passions. This is very difficult for us, and it's very difficult to scale in terms of experts that will teach them what to do, because most of the experts has gone to school 40 years ago and started their academic career 25 years ago, and most of their experience, most of their knowledge is completely irrelevant. Don't quote me on that. Now let me make, if I have a little bit more time, I'd like to make some disjointed remarks about a few issues that you have to take into account. The first issue is the issue of intellectual property regulations in countries and in universities. Again, the issue of intellectual property developed at universities according to the model of developing medicine. If you look at the intellectual property revenues to universities, almost all of them come from medicine. If you look at the world today, medicine is a really tiny fraction of the economy, and you're not going to transform Greece by building on intellectual property models built on medicine. The world today is different. IP behaves in a different way. The universities typically are 15 years behind if we're lucky, 40 if you're not. And I'll give you a model that was developed here in the Cornell Tech Innovation Institute. Fortunately, this institute is an independent legal entity, non-for-profit organization. It doesn't belong to the Technion, it doesn't belong to Cornell in the sense of owning the property. And therefore, we have our own IP rules. Our IP rules for postdoctoral experts that come to develop products in the institute are very simple. We look at the money we give them as salary and as money for research as an investment. We get a convertible note for those of you who know what it is. We don't try to evaluate them. We don't try to control the IP. We give them free, unlimited, exclusive license to use their own IP and do whatever they want. And when they're done, we're just part of the company. Now, this is the model that I get a lot of people from university write to me in a lot of frustration. How did you manage to do that? We can't. But this is something that in some sense is influenced by policy at the government level. And if you want to move forward in the high-tech sector, this is one thing you have to address. About reaching young people, I think the most powerful thing is role models and other, and as a follow-up to role models, information that is available on the internet, not in the form of long scholarly papers, but in the form of very short examples of the kind that young people consume today. This is your key to transforming the people in the economy, and transforming the people is 1/3 of the equation, together with technical depth and with the support from the financial side to make the transition. You may want to leverage all the organizations that deal with young people. In Israel, elementary schools have education and competitions in entrepreneurship. It's part of education at that age, and this is just a little bit too late. I think we should start in kindergarten. And last and probably not least, we shouldn't forget the underprivileged. We have minority groups and other underprivileged groups, and there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't take part in this growth and this opportunity. And I'll just mention 2 examples that were done at the Technion. The Technion has a special class for the ultra-Orthodox. These are people that when they start this class at the age of roughly 18, the class usually starts with a question where they put on the board 6 times 6, so that's 6x6, and they are asked to comment on that. About half of them say, what is this thing in the middle between the 6s? And the other half say, well, we understand what the question is, but we don't know what the answer is. This is 18-year-old people. It takes about a year and a half to get them to the position that they can apply to universities because they are smart. About half of them are accepted to universities and they move forward. And the same thing is done with people from low social classes. I think that's an effort you have to include in any country scale attempt that you make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Doxiadis.
Okay. Now, perhaps as some of you know, I have 2 different capacities. One is as a venture capital professional, but on the other is that I have been taking part in the policy debates in Greece in recent years. And I must say that I'm very tempted to discard what I have written up to say in this session in order to jump into the previous debate on the broader policy issues, but I will resist this temptation. I will just say this, that a lot of what we talked about yesterday and this morning in terms of broader policy has to overcome the basic issue of broken transmission mechanisms. Whether it is the the policy of the European Central Bank that is failing to transmit liquidity to the Greek market, or whether it is proposals like creating hundreds of thousands of jobs in the public sector, which I believe is going to face again a broken transmission mechanism that will make it almost impossible to implement. However, I'm fortunate in my capacity as a venture capital professional to be working in one little sector of the economy where the transmission mechanism of public policy seems to be working. And this is for the following reason. The Greek government and the European Commission decided 2 years ago to inject money into venture capital funds that will invest in very early stage technology, in ICT technologies, in the form of seed capital. And they have created 4 funds. I'm working in one of them, which is called the Openfund, of a total of about 70 million euros commitments. About 30% of the money is from private investors and 70% is from the so-called Jeremy program. Now, I think this is working, and I'll tell you why I think this is working based on my experience. Coming to my comments on Dimitris' presentation. First of all, I say that I fully agree with the general strategy, which is to leverage what exists and to provide high-quality expertise where it doesn't exist. I think this is the sensible strategy. But I will give you some feedback based on my experience on the ground. I think it's useful to separate the ecosystem of startups or of potential startups into 3 areas in Greece. One is existing startups or active entrepreneurs who have either set up their company or are almost ready to set up the company. The second area is universities and research libraries. And the third area is young people in general. Now, talking about existing startups first. The most successful and the most promising teams, startup teams, in Greece at the moment are not connected with universities or with research laboratories. They have been created by entrepreneurs who've come out of the woodwork, were either working in large companies or were not working at all. They have dreamed up ideas to solve practical problems for consumers or businesses. The concepts that they are working on are not driven by new research or by technical breakthroughs. We can say that as far as technology is concerned, their concepts are driven by the demand for solutions that can be provided by known technologies rather than by the supply of new research results. To give you some numbers, at Openfund, we have seen in about 14 months of operation, we have seen 600 submissions. We have invested in 12. None of them has come out of a university. Typically, the business models have been either marketplaces or services for particular verticals. And the main vertical, as you would expect, that many of our startups serve is tourism. We have 4 companies working broadly in technology services for the tourism area. 3 of them are marketplaces. One of them is a booking system for very small lodgings. Some of them are software as a service companies. A couple are novelty applications. Of those 12, only 1 requires any sort of laboratory tests to fine-tune their product, and they will try to link up with the university research laboratory after they have created their business and their concept. The founders of these startups very often have a technical background from good universities, but they do not have a career in research. Now, this ecosystem is vibrant, it is optimistic, it has had its successes already, and it can also look to an earlier round of successes, which has been in the years from 2002 until recently. What developed in Greece was a small cluster of businesses in the mobile marketing services. We have 3 companies that are world-class in this. They're global leaders in mobile marketing. They have developed out of nothing over the past 10 or 12 years. And they have, according to one of the founders, their total exports last year were of the order of 800 million euro. About 10 companies exporting 800 million euro. Now, this is a success story that has come out of nowhere. Nobody could have predicted it. And this is, by the way, why I take issue with some ideas about saying, and we heard some of that yesterday, that somehow Greece should try to predict what sectors it's strong at and sort of throw resources at that. I think you cannot predict successes like that, and we should be more open than that. So, if the Institute can help the existing startups to grow and to become successful, in my view, this is the fastest way to create jobs and the fastest way to stimulate other young people to follow the example. So what are the most pressing needs for these existing startups? The first thing is finding good employees. The binding constraint today in the startup ecosystem is not founders. We do have good founders. It is the first 3 or 4 people that they will hire after they have set up the company. What all of our founders are saying is that they cannot find good developers at reasonable cost. Experienced developers are already occupied in bigger companies, or they're working out of their house in the suburbs of Athens as freelancers for the world, and they make good money out of that. So, anything that you can do to accelerate the training of new graduates so that they can be ready to produce when they join a startup will have a great impact. The second need they have is they need to start thinking, where will they find the next round of investor? We tell them that you have to be ready within 12 months or 18 months at the utmost to go out and raise your next few million, and you will not find this in Greece. The investors have to be based in the States probably, or in London or somewhere in Europe, and they need introductions to the right investors. And this means, as Adam said before, networking in this business is extremely important, and if you can provide networking to the types of investors who may be interested in a second round of financing, this would be great. And in the same vein, many startups are looking for strategic partners, for larger technology companies that can work with them and perhaps buy them out. Again, this is an issue of networking, so if you can provide networking for that, this will be great. This part of the ecosystem is not going to benefit from more competitions, more events, anything like that. Lots of these things are happening in Greece, particularly in Athens, and there's no incremental value in adding a few more of those. But I think, however, you should be working with the informal networks of these startups, get to know them, become their friend, listen to what they need, and perhaps provide what they need very flexibly when they need it. I think I'm out of time. Am I out of time?
You're okay. You're okay with time.
Okay, I'll just say one thing about universities. As I say, after 14 months and 600 submissions, we have had we have had about 10 submissions out of 600 coming out of universities, and we haven't invested in any of those. Now, why is this? I don't think it is because we lack research in Greek universities. Now, research is indeed not well funded in Greece. Everybody knows that. But by various metrics, university research is not bad. They're very good in producing papers that are well cited and so on. And I have seen ideas in university laboratories that could very well become the basis for a startup. But there are many obstacles, both legal and cultural and political. I will not go into the obstacles. To some extent, the problem is that professors and graduate students are not aware how to participate in ventures without having to break off academia completely. We have to educate them how this can be done. So we have decided at Openfund to spend the next 6 months talking with IT, with computer engineering or software engineering departments around Greece, and to see if we can sort of convince them to think more in a business sense. But because the institutional environment is quite hostile to official spin-offs, I think we should also try to increase the tacit, the below-the-radar transfer of technology from research laboratories to businesses. And one way to do that is to give more incentives to startups to hire PhD graduates that have done their research in some university laboratory with some professors who may be looking for a salary that may be a bit high, a bit pricey for a young startup to have. So perhaps one pilot project that you could think about is incentivizing startups to hire recent PhD graduates from engineering schools who will bring with them some of the research results, and this informally become a technology transfer mechanism. I think I will stop here.
Yes,
thanks.
That would be good. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me start and first of all just have a quick acknowledgement to the Niarchos Foundation for convening this conference, but more than that, for the work that they've done over the years in providing very targeted and humane assistance to Greece in contending with what are huge, clearly very daunting circumstances. And it's such a privilege to be here today to be part of the ongoing efforts by the foundation to make a difference in Greece, and in particular to be able to talk about something that is very important, that is the youth and the next generation of citizens of that country. Let me start by also saying something about the MIT proposal. I think it's a wonderful straw man and a great place to start a discussion that fits very nicely in the conversation that we've been having for the last day or so. My purchase today comes less from my role as university president. I've been at Johns Hopkins for about 5 years, although I have some purchase on this issue, given that I'm at a university that is struggling mightily with this issue of how do we take a significant amount of federal research funding, close to $1 billion a year, and figure out how we can take up our game in the tech transfer area. This is something that Hopkins has sadly punched below its weight for some years now in terms of its conversion of that federal research funding into concrete licensing and patent revenue. And so, one part of my remarks comes from that perspective. But fundamentally, I'm speaking today from my discipline, which is as a law professor, but in fact a law and economics professor. And over the years, I've thought a lot about issues of the role of state and market in supporting a range of different goals, and in particular, how you use law and legal institutions to ensure welfare gains for society. So it's against that backdrop that I want to start off with what is sadly, I think, a somewhat sobering set of remarks about the proposal that we are looking at. And that is that we have to start off and recognize, as lots of scholars have over the years, that first of all, the whole area of entrepreneurialism is highly risky. It's characterized by high failure rates. There's a debate over ultimately the contributions of employment from the entrepreneurial sector and innovation, whether the sector punches above, below, or at its weight. I'm not going to get into that debate, but I think it's only important to note that even in a highly developed, stable society with strong legal institutions not contending with very significant macroeconomic shocks, entrepreneurial activity is beset by very, very risky characteristics, and there's a lot of challenges in that setting. So that's a starting point, and I think if one goes even further, we have to acknowledge, and again, this is in the context of industrialized countries with very strong background institutional arrangements, that the record of government efforts to provide targeted assistance for spurring entrepreneurial activity, whether we're talking about training assistance, venture capital funds of various types, is poor, sadly poor, in settings that are pretty robust in terms of the quality of background legal institutions. And I say this again, now I'll speak with my Johns Hopkins hat. It comes as no surprise that there's been some considerable success in Silicon Valley and Route 128. We know that, and indeed virtually every state of the union has seen that example, been inspired by it, and tried in a variety of different ways to spur entrepreneurial activity that allows these other states to create clusters that can compete with those very successful clusters. And it turns out it's really hard. And again, there's a large field of dreams that ends up being, sadly, translates into a cemetery with a lot of policy corpses in it. And so we have to be very, very realistic about what we know and what we don't know about interventions in this area. And for a recent, and I think very good review of these issues, I commend Josh Lerner's book, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, which constitutes a very good survey of failed efforts over the last several decades to build strong interventions by the state in this area. Well, as you can imagine, you can see where I'm going. If it's hard in a place like the United States to crack the formula and get interventions right, imagine what it's like in a setting where you're contending with the massive challenges that Greece is confronting with respect to its macroeconomic shocks. And so that's one dimension. But the other dimension, which has been alluded to and we must keep in mind, is the really sad, sobering reality of the quality of general background law, legal institutions that exist in Greece. So again, you know these statistics, and I take no joy in sharing them with you today, but it is a useful and sobering backdrop for what we're talking about. If you look at the Global Competitiveness Index, in 2012 to 13, Greece ranked 96 out of 144 countries. Labor market flexibility and efficiency, 133rd of 144 countries surveyed. If you look at the quality of legal framework and solving disputes, 135 out of 144. Transparency of government regulation, 141 out of 144. Another set of rankings that have been done of Greece, doing business from the World Bank. Ease of doing business in Greece. The average of OECD countries gets a rank of 29. Germany is ranked 20. Austria is 29. Greece is ranked 78. Starting business, again, from the Doing Business survey. New Zealand is ranked as number 1. Greece is 146. It takes one procedure to start a business in New Zealand. It takes 11 procedures in Greece. Enforcing contracts. Luxembourg is number 1. Greece is number 87. One could go on in this vein. I say this because ultimately the real concern from my perspective, for Greece and where we need to have impact is changing those background rules, changing that framework and creating better institutions, because ultimately, as we well know, entrepreneurship requires strong legal institutions, strong general institutions, strong government, strong limited government that allows people to be entrepreneurial. And in the absence of fixing that, we've got a real problem. And so what I think is important is thinking about this really interesting and provocative proposal that's before us. How can this proposal play a role in serving as an effective demonstration project that is a catalyst for improving general institutions within Greece? Because at the end of the day, we all know, and it's really captured in the spirit of your remarks, that if you want to have startups, it has to be easy to start a company. If you want to have startups, you have to look at complex contracts with milestones that, again, allow for good investor protection and enforcement of contracts. And if we don't have those things, no targeted intervention is going to work. So how do we do this? How do we actually use this proposal as a way of making that happen? Well, here I've just got a few. This is, again, the joy of being the commentator. I don't have a clear answer, but I can suggest some general paths for how one would think about this. First of all, I really appreciate the spirit of choice that's in this proposal. The proposal starts with an assumption it's not going to try and do everything. It's going to try and be focused. Having said that, I think the proposal could even be much more focused than it is. For instance, right now, the proposal speaks to supporting interventions in agriculture, tourism, information systems, and then products, new product businesses, and so forth. I think this is, again, way too many areas, and I would really think about focusing it. We heard strong arguments previously yesterday for the virtues of the leveraging effect, the multiplier effect from focusing on agriculture and tourism. I think one of those areas is a good place to start. And then I think I'd even go further and think about a small subset of institutions with which to work. Again, doing this on a national basis across a range of different institutions, I think is going to be highly problematic. Again, the plea for focus here is to ensure that there's expertise and a capacity to make a difference in an area where, again, entrepreneurial activity is beset by huge information asymmetries. The more that expertise is concentrated, the more familiarity that this initiative has in an area where they can have impact, I think ultimately the more successful it will be. Let me also say that I think, and again, I really appreciate the spirit that permeates through this report, or through the straw man. I think incentive alignment is a critical issue. Here, it's so important, taking a leaf from a number of the many, many failed initiatives that have been mounted by governments and foundations throughout the world. You have to have symmetrical risk sharing. So I think that to the extent that we're not just, and the report acknowledges, the proposal acknowledges that that only 10 to 30% of capital invested will come from the initiative. There's got to be lots of matching funds there. I think that's an important concept, but it's not just, to my mind, limited to the VC side. I think job training assistance, a lot of these efforts should ultimately make sure that the key stakeholders, particularly on the industry side, and even the youth who are participating, have some skin in the game. So again, we have symmetrical risk sharing and get the incentives aligned properly. Another thought is how important I think it is that there be leveraging effects here. And again, this is a small, even if it's well-funded, as the Niarchos Foundation does really great works, but ultimately to have impact here, I think it's important to be able to think about how it can use its leverage to extract funds from government, industry, and other stakeholders, so that there really is a multiplier effect on the program. And again, that ties in very nicely, I think, with the incentive alignment point I made a moment ago. I think also, quite frankly, it's good to try and think about how you leverage the international network of expatriates who might have expertise and who can play a role in husbanding this initiative. Let me say, and this is, I think, I have two quick points and then I'll finish. I think the next idea is, and this goes back to something Jeff Sachs said yesterday, and I really endorse this strong, and that is, how do you create an enclave here for whatever ambit of activity that is taken on in this area? How do you create an enclave that insulates the participants in this activity from the really dysfunctional institutional arrangements that operate generally in the country? So here, we often think of special economic zones as being focused on cutting through the red tape for export-oriented industry. Maybe there's a way of creating an enclave here around whatever the zone of activity is that you're going to work on, and say that there's going to be quick, access to startup companies, maybe relief from perverse labor regulations, just a host of unique aspects that actually make the entity or the activities more likely to succeed, because you've been able to insulate the activities from the dysfunctional institutional arrangements that pervade Greece more generally. And here the hope is, if this works, then you can say this is a catalyst for why we want more generalized form of background institutional arrangements in the country. And finally, I just think the major issue to be really cognizant of is, given that this is going to be an experiment, I think quite a noble experiment, again, there's a likelihood even of the activities here with a lot of good intentions and even attention to all the issues I've mentioned. There's going to be some interventions that work, others that don't, and in fact probably most won't work. I think this is where evaluation, critical evaluation, and the capacity to reallocate funds, activities within the effort are going to be really important in terms of seeing its success. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fay.
Thank you. And I'm acutely aware of the fact that I'm in the not so enviable position of standing between you and lunch. So I'll, with that in mind, I'll try to exercise a bit of brevity in my comments. Certainly I come from the Brookings Institution Metropolitan Policy Program, and our starting point really always in all our work is really that, coming out of the global recession that we've all been facing, nations and the metropolitan and areas and the cities within them that really drive the economies of those nations really need to pivot to a different type of model of economic growth. It's focused on innovation, it's focused on technology, it's focused on exports, and ultimately really it's about creating greater opportunity, particularly, as we've been discussing the last couple of days, for the younger generation that's really just trying to get their foothold in this economy. And so where that brings us is we really focus all our research and policy development and practice efforts on what are the solutions? How do we help do this? And I think, at the heart, that's what this institute is trying to do. I mean, surely it's about youth and the unemployment issue on one hand, but over the very long term, this is really about how do you start to think about how you propel the Greek economy forward. And as risky as entrepreneurship is, clearly the ability to start new companies that will ultimately be employers, and shifting to this new type of economy that is more innovative, that is more export-oriented, is really going to be key, not just to the health of Greece, certainly, but this is something that all nations are really focused with. So with that in mind, and with that sort of as a backdrop, I just wanted to really highlight, 3 issues to consider as this institute continues to get designed, developed, and ultimately implemented. First of all, and I'll back up to talk about each of these in details, how does the institute relate to and support growth of the broader innovation and export-oriented economy at the national level in Greece? Second, how does it relate to and support the new spatial geography of innovation that we're seeing at the sub-metro and actually sub-city level? And I'll talk a little bit about that. And finally, how does it relate to and support collaboration and networking in the creative design, actually, of individual spaces for entrepreneurship and that foster entrepreneurship? So on this first point, is really, how can the Institute support entrepreneurship in ways that ultimately drive a more balanced economy for Greece? And, it builds on existing strengths in things like agriculture and tourism, but over the very long haul really helps identify and grow the other productive, innovative, tradable sectors that clearly Greece or any country really needs to move up the value chain of global competitiveness. So to do this, really, I think maybe it's a two-pronged approach, and I think this came up earlier in one of the questions, really. It's really about the short term, the immediate term, and the immediate needs versus the very long term, and the fact that you really need to be focusing on both at the same time. So one, to really try to realize some of the more immediate benefits from entrepreneurship, how can the Institute really focus on cultivating that entrepreneurial activity and developing innovative products, services, processes, including things like app-based products and services that really relate to the country's traditional economic strength. So, how do you find new ways to promote entrepreneurship and promote innovation in the tourism sector, around streamlining travel services, or how do you, addressing problems in the agricultural sector, such as providing new ways, say, to market food. I mean, you can see, how do you start to link innovation into some of these existing sectors? But, over the much longer term, this is really about how do you foster entrepreneurship to advance the product development in strengths that maybe aren't yet leveraged. And some of this is really about how do you identify what those strengths are. And, I don't think, again, I don't think you can be fully predictive, certainly, but clearly in our work and what we really try to be aggressive about doing is really using very, very in-depth, market research at the regional level, at the metro level, to really understand what that potential really can be. And because, and we really focus a lot on advanced industries, which I think you've pointed to will be some of the long-term focus of the Institute. And I think just, making sure that those are the right industries, over time to be focused on through rigorous through rigorous analysis. And then I think what, part of the charge of the Institute, or maybe the foundation more broadly, is figuring out how then young people can get the skills in those industries. Entrepreneurship, clearly can't happen in a vacuum. And I think there's been a lot of talk about developing those STEM skills, but as you look to see, what in the future are some of the industries that maybe you have some existing strengths in that could really be leveraged, how do you ensure that you're preparing young people to be able to it's not just about getting those jobs, but to become the entrepreneurs in those jobs. But that's obviously going to really require the technical skills to be able to become entrepreneurs, and that's really a very long-term play. Coming to sort of my second point, which is really about sort of sub-metro, sub-city geographies, is really how can the Institute support what we're really seeing as this new spatial geography of innovation that's emerging across the globe. Over the past couple of years, we've been doing a lot of work really trying to almost be trend spotting, really. Some of what we're seeing in terms of how innovative firms and talented workers are where they're locating and why they're choosing to congregate and co-locate. and what we're seeing is really compact, innovative enclaves, often that are occurring at the core of central cities, often around anchor institutions, but not necessarily, always so. And basically, we're seeing a lot of these patterns develop from some big forces. And again, this is happening in the US, but it's happening across the globe, where we're seeing companies that are in knowledge-intensive sectors who really just want to be located near other firms. They want to be located near universities. They want to be located near research labs, and in ways that allow them to collaborate and share ideas and practice open innovation. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of the young talent, particularly youth, this is certainly happening in this country as well as other places, that are just demanding different types of environments on where they want to live. And they too want to be in more dynamic environments. And so what's happening is these demographic trends and these economic trends are really starting to revalue proximity and density, and the physical attributes that you see in those type of environments. And what we and others have been referring to these as innovation districts. And again, these are smaller enclaves. This isn't about what's happening at the regional, certainly the national scale or the regional scale, but really what's even happening in much, much smaller enclaves, where you're seeing this dynamic activity starting to take place. And it's emerging. I mean, even in the last couple of years, we're seeing this crop up all over the place. Certainly, I think in this country, around Kendall Square, and MIT is probably the furthest along example, but there's a designated district in Boston. You're seeing it happen in places like St. Louis. We've actually been doing a lot of work in Detroit. Across the globe, you're seeing it in Europe, you're seeing it in Asia. And I think, what this really means for the Institute is really thinking about what these trends are in terms of how you promote entrepreneurship at the geographic level, and how some of these spatial trends are playing out, and what that really means as you think about designing the Institute. And then finally, I think my third and last point is how can the Institute really think about creative ways to support the individual type of spaces. We're really talking almost at the building level, that encourages collaboration and networking. And today's most innovative sectors are really, they're just far more open than in decades past. I think the old model of innovation, and you can see it, in the US, you can see it throughout the globe, is really, the old model of the science park, where people sort of, we're working in more isolated settings, or either in an office, in a research park, or even in sort of the proverbial working in your garage or out of your basement. And that's how ideas developed, and that's clearly not what's happening now in today's innovative economy. So you can look and say, well, what kind of spaces then promote that kind of networking and collaboration? And part of this is about what's happening in these enclaves, these innovation districts, but even within those districts, what are those type of spaces? And there are a lot of interesting models here. You can look at the Cambridge Innovation Center in Cambridge, or 1776 in Washington, D.C., and other types of incubator and co-working spaces that move beyond kind of the model of incubation that you see, for decades, that's really about just cheap space anywhere. to try to promote entrepreneurship. But this is really about creating very high-end physical spaces that have all the amenities that entrepreneurs want and that workers really not just want, but they need. And to have a successful business. So I think as the Institute is moving forward, how can you think about how you work with the partners and try to create these dynamic physical spaces that will really promote entrepreneurship. So, again, I think just, in conclusion, obviously this piece, this Institute, this entrepreneurship is just one piece of a much larger puzzle when we're talking about youth unemployment. But over the long haul, it'll clearly be essential to the future of the Greek economy. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. We've heard a lot of interesting insights, I think, about the use of high technology, the importance of using best practices, such as in Israel, the importance of having good, educated employees, and perhaps placing priority on the already set up companies, the importance of easing up regulation for setting up business, focusing more, linking innovation to the right sectors, using demographic trends, providing the right environments for work. So many experts in the room, we want to hear a lot from all of you, but let's use the time that's left before lunch to just take questions and pick the brains of the panel here. Yeah, okay.
Hi.
Over there.
My name is Mareva Grabowski, and I founded Endeavor Greece, a high-impact entrepreneurship non-profit organization. I have a question, Mr. Bertsimas, Professor Bertsimas. There are many initiatives that have started in Greece, many. They're doing a great job. One of the things that I wondered, because we got a great picture from Mr. Doxiadis, a pragmatical picture of what's happening in Greece. You have a great advantage being one of the best technological institutes in the world, maybe the best university. And it comes from me. I went to Harvard, I didn't go to MIT. But you are the best. I was wondering, why have you thought maybe of creating a tech sector, focused just on the tech sector that is really needed in Greece, based entrepreneurship and tech sector, like, for example, Argentina, taking the model of Argentina, where there's a multiplier effect of one tech, of the tech sector that has been extremely successful, and creating the same model, recreating the same model in Greece, because you have the best advantage. And instead of focusing on agriculture or tourism, where there are many that have been doing the same thing. I mean, Greece right now is looking for somebody like you, like MIT and the know-how that comes from that, to really create the tech geographically, can have an impact and create a tech sector.
Clearly, this is something that has crossed our minds, to the issue of focus. We heard it also from my colleague on the left, that it might be that in the end we might have to focus far more than we have at the moment. I mean, we don't claim that we have the totality of understanding. So clearly, in fact, one of the people I would like to meet is you. So something to discuss, and obviously we have some understanding of the tech sector, that's true. But on the other hand, we might find opportunities. The end objective, of course, is not to develop the tech sector. The end objective is to help Greece from a wealth and employment perspective. So we are open to the idea that you mentioned of focusing furthermore, and something to discuss. That's sort of my short answer to the matter.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alexander Lamnidis. I'm representing the Greek Tourism Confederation. Excellent panel, by the way, and thank you very much to the Niarchos Foundation. I'd like to say that probably to help you in what you're doing, or your thoughts, Professor Bertsimas, is that we have already proposed under an EU if you like, scheme where we have been meeting different social partners in Greece. We have proposed, we have provided a proposal that will go to Dr. Reichenbach, who is the coordinator of the EU in Greece, to formulate, if you like, a capital of 200 million that would go along the lines that you have exactly said. I mean, as if we had been talking about it before, but we haven't. Meaning that in this way, we could help companies actually furthering themselves and doing it outside the banking system that is not really functioning properly, just to say the least, recently. And in order to do that, we proposed that this particular board, as you very well put it, I mean, we didn't go to such detail, would actually keep a certain percentage of the companies that it is financing, and coming up with a model of having some of them becoming major boosters of the economy. Then the model is that this particular fund would have enough money to go out and help more companies later on. So I just wanted to share this information with you. Thank you.
Another person to collaborate and think with.
Thank you. Yes, two gentlemen here.
My name is George Papadakis. I'm Vice Rector of the Agricultural University of Athens. Thank you very much for all the talks, the lectures today. The next session is going to focus on agriculture. However, since I have the experience of the Greek university, I'd like to say a few words about research and how research can help the development of the country right now in the middle of crisis. It is mentioned that research is at a good level in Greek universities, despite the very low funding of research. We actually get something like, in total, 0.5 of GDP for research, while the average in the European Union is 1.5. So, as it was mentioned, there are many, many problems of how research can be actually transferred to the real economy, and this is what we need in the country right now. There are political, as it was said, there are cultural and also legal obstacles. So you have to waive these obstacles. Until now, I can say that there was no real political will for doing all this that we are discussing right now. To be honest, there was no also political will from the university side. And we know that. We have to say that. However, the situation is changing, and the proof is that we are here. So, the institute that is proposed to be created has to be connected with the universities, directly connected with the universities. Why? Because according to the statistics, 70% of research is done in the universities in Greece. And the big gap is between research and creating products, transferring the research to the real economy. So in our university, we have started already creating such a we say center, not institute, on entrepreneurship and tech transfer, etc. I would probably agree with the proposition that this institute should be focused on technology rather than also on tourism and agriculture. Why? Because we want to do it on agriculture. And we're going to discuss about that.
If we could limit
in the next session.
The time used, yes,
okay.
To questions and a bit more.
Yes, so the question is how you see this institute to be connected with the universities in Greece.
Okay, so I have, as you perhaps know, a dual role. I am also involved in the University of Athens. And at this moment, in my honest opinion, I don't believe the University of Athens is ready for being involved in entrepreneurial activities. There's no, I mean, all the issues that we have mentioned, the legal aspects, IP aspects, I mean, where can I start, that is? So we are not simply ready. I mean, I cannot really believe that University of Athens is a unique, I mean, I believe the universities as a whole in Greece have a long way to go to be able to be participants and great contributors in these efforts. I'm sorry to say, it's not something but that's my honest assessment of what I have seen in the last 1 year that I have been involved in the Greek, in the University of Athens. It's not that I think it's a bad idea, but I don't think we are ready. I think there is room, significant room to go. That's my honest assessment.
Let's allow for more questions if that's okay. Minister Stavros.
Thank you. I think I should say that it is wrong to debate whether or not we should do this thing, the other, or the other thing. I think we should do all of them, but in order and with priorities. Okay? It will be wrong to say that if we today have 100 euros, let's say, to spend, somebody said, spend it all in a theoretical physics. That will, you know, in 50 years, will help Greece to become, let's say, at the top of the technology. In the meantime, the Greeks will die. That's the problem today. So we should prioritize. We should spend some money today in food and agriculture, tourism. Then that will start giving back return, let's say, tomorrow. That is really tomorrow, because we have to pay back some money. That is what the Troika is asking for. Secondly, some money, if we have some extra money, then we should give it to Aristos Doxiadis, because his work will start returning back money in 2 or 3 years. That's something. And then we should help Bertsimas to set up something that in 10, 50 years, as you said, there will...
Bertsimas.
Bertsimas, I'm sorry.
Just to make certain.
Bertsimas. I am sure that it will take 2 or 3 years to figure out, you know, all these difficulties with the university. So, and then later,
no, but I did not mention about the university. I'm sorry, I did not.
No.
Others did. I did not.
I didn't mean that. And then I should say that does not necessarily mean that we should not put some amount of some money to even formulate this theoretical institute that will eventually, you know, keep us in touch with the technology and open opportunities even in 30 or 40 years. So it is not one or the other. It is all of them in order and in prioritizing them. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Please.
Hello. My name is Gidi Greenstein. I'm from Israel, from the Root Institute. And my question actually wants to focus on the idea that you need an institute. Because in a world that is changing so fast, and institutions tend to become rigid, you know, standard operating procedures, etc., etc. And when, at least in our experience, we know that prosperity comes from networks of small units. Just another thing you may want to know about Israel, all of our major labs, national labs that drove innovation in the 70s and 80s had to be massively bailed out by the government over the last few years. So, did you look at the opportunity or the approach that basically says we're going to create a very lean and mean operation that nurture the ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship in Greece, as opposed to the approach of building an institution seems to be quite big? Thank you.
Thank you. No? Okay. Let's take a couple more questions before lunch.
Although this needs an answer.
Sorry.
It's
yes.
a direct question, right? I mean, it's inappropriate to give an answer. So here's my observations. Obviously, I'm by nature, I'm not a huge fan of big things. I mean, you know, all my life I've done startups. I mean, that's not, I mean, I've never built, in fact, I have a natural affinity against. However, I have observed the following, that is, for something like this to be successful, you need to attract people that have integrity, that have some vision, and experience. And to say that, and to do it in a somewhat organized way. My suspicion is you need guidance on that. If you say, let us start few small institutions, a few smaller things, and hopefully you hope that something would happen, I wouldn't bet that this would be successful. It is my hope anyway that that with guidance, with people that with experience and integrity, we are going to move in a path that and in an accelerated way also that Israel has moved over longer periods of time. But that's my short answer to that.
Yeah, I just can't help resisting the temptation, talk about, as you raise the issue of, well, go back to the Israeli experience, big institution, failed policies. And I mean, again, I think we have to disentangle bad institutions from bad policies. And, it's hard for me to imagine, particularly on the model that's being proposed here, if they're going to venture into this area and try and stimulate some kind of change and entrepreneurial activity in Greece. I mean, someone's got to be the advocate for it. You need an institution. And it just can't happen spontaneously. I don't think that's what you're advocating. I think what you are advocating for, though, is keeping it light. And I think the spirit, and it goes to what I said a few moments ago, having, even if you say it's sector specific, but recognizing that you're going to have some significant experimentation and different approaches as to how you're going to assist the sector, and then scrupulous and objective evaluation against milestones, and then you can correct the activities of the Institute towards moving in the direction of things that work as opposed to what they don't. But it's hard for me to wrap my head around the idea that there wouldn't be an institution. I mean, in some sense, this is a problem that Greece has. It has institutions, but they're weak and fragile and in a lot of ways perverse and dysfunctional. I mean, the idea is that we want someone to be an advocate for entrepreneurialism and going to be able to galvanize others in society and ultimately embarrass the government into making some of the broader changes we talked about so that you get an easier framework against which this activity can happen across the country.
Much better said than I said. I agree 100% actually with the statement.
Thank you. Professor Donopoulos.
Just a quick question to Mr. Bertsimas, but also, I guess, to Mr. Doxiadis. I am getting confused when it comes to the labor market institutions and how they function in Greece by now. In a TV interview, actually, Mr. Doxiadis was there. There was an entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur that exports, that was asked about labor markets and also the labor cost in his production and so on. And he said, that's not a problem. I have loyal, very productive workers. At the same time, we have, on the one hand, the ILO saying that the Greek markets have been as flexibilized as it gets. It has never happened before in 2-3 years' time to have introduced so much flexibility in terms of wages, severance pay, and what have you. On the other hand, I do hear in many panels this notion, including from the World Bank and the indices about doing business, that there is a problem. I would love to hear your view. Where are we? Are we telling investors essentially, don't come to Greece because labor markets are not where they should be? Or has there been more than enough progress that actually is not hindering investment? If there is a problem with investment inflows in Greece right now, it's elsewhere, but not there. I would like Mr. Bertsimas and Mr. Doxiadis' comments. Thank you.
I actually feel, having spent all my adult life in the United States, it's hard for me now. So I can have an answer, but I think we have a more informed answer.
Okay, my view is that labor market changes or reforms are probably the ones that have gone further than any other type of reform in Greece. Therefore, I think that the situation is very, very different from what it was 3 years ago. It will take a little time in order to this to be felt through enterprise decisions and so on. But I would not say that at this stage further labor market reforms are critical. I don't think they are, with the exception perhaps of the threshold for firing people, because this is an issue of large companies, and if you want to attract large companies in Greece, you need to have a bit more flexibility there. But otherwise, I think that what will be holding back investment is not labor market anymore, it's other things. Okay.
Hello, my name is Marina Efremoglu, and I come from an investment banking entrepreneur background, but my family is from an industrial background, so I wear both hats. So my question is, to this really interesting panel. We've talked about technology, agriculture, tourism, and I think that these are very, very important. We've never talked in this conference about really giving help to the small, micro, even nano entrepreneurs, which could be craftsmen, which could lead to production and could directly help unemployment. What I'm suggesting is use the talent of many people, youth people, many women, most of them are women, that can be creative. They can be creative in the industry of fashion, or generally in the industry of fashion, and by having an incubator and support, they can really directly affect unemployment, and especially women's unemployment.
I think that this is an interesting point that you're raising, and I think what you're seeing, certainly in places all around the U.S., is this movement around crafts. And the advent of what are so-called maker spaces cropping up, and they have come in different forms and have different models, but it really ties into the overall innovation ecosystem clearly, and it allows people to have a broader entry point into that. People who may have an idea but don't necessarily, they certainly don't have the equipment or the money to be able to really develop that idea. And I think that's what these maker spaces really allow people to do. And there are ways to tie young people into those. On my way up yesterday, I had the opportunity to stop in Philadelphia at the University City Science Center, which is in the area around Drexel University and University of Pennsylvania. And in that area, which really focuses on technology and life sciences, that has a long history of collaborating with many, many different stakeholders around innovation and entrepreneurship. In recent years, they too have integrated this sort of maker space. And in fact, in this space that they have really been very deliberate about tying youth into that space through different types of programming, because it's a way to bring young people in, to really focus on where the nexus is between arts, say, and technology, and allow them some of the physical space and allow them access to that, and help and mentoring to start to be creative, and even at the youngest levels. And this is something that if you can sort of start to cultivate early, and at the same time these spaces obviously also are broadly open to the community, certainly, that's a way to, I think, help foster entrepreneurship, as you said.
Thank you. I think it would be wise to conclude here and go for lunch. Professor Bertsimas, members of the panel, thank you very much.